The sound of metal snapping woke me up at 2 in the morning. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac in a neighborhood that's supposed to be peaceful. But ever since I refused to let the HOA bully me into repainting my perfectly fine mailbox, I've been on their radar. Especially Francesca Delaney, our HOA president, and a full-blown Karen if there ever was one. Mid-50s, fake pearls, and a voice like a leaf blower during a hangover. I rolled out of bed, grabbed my phone, and pulled up the live security feed from the camera I installed over my front gate last month. I nearly dropped the phone. There she was. Francesca, tiptoeing through my front yard like she was on some covert mission. She had bolt cutters in one hand and a flashlight in the other. My jaw clenched as I watched her fumble with the chain on my gate, the same chain I installed after she tried to fine me for unsightly fencing, even though her backyard looks like a junkyard hosted a garage sale. Snap. The lock broke clean off and she actually smiled to herself. That's when I hit record on my camera feed. I threw on jeans, slipped into my boots, and moved fast. By the time I got to the front door, she was halfway through my yard, muttering something about property standards and non-compliant landscaping. I stepped outside and flipped on the porch light. "Francesca," I said, loud enough to stop her cold. She froze like a deer in headlights. Caught mid-step, bolt cutters still dangling in her hand. "Brandon, you startled me," she tried, like she hadn't just committed a crime on my property. "You broke my lock," I said, walking forward. I held up my phone, and I've got it all on camera. Her mouth opened and closed a few times. "Well, I received a complaint from the HOA board about your hedges and the gate. It's a safety hazard. I was just inspecting, by cutting through it at 2 a.m. She looked around like a lifeline might be hiding in the bushes. "I serve this community. Sometimes that means making tough calls," I laughed. "You're gonna regret this tough call." She took a step back. "You wouldn't dare report this. I know people, I know laws, and trespassing, vandalism, and destruction of private property, that's 3 strikes, lady." Francesca's face went pale. She suddenly looked a lot less like a powerful HOA president and a lot more like someone who just realized she pushed the wrong guy. "Let's go inside," I said, holding the phone up again. "You're gonna want to see what the police are about to see." She didn't move. Just stood there, still clutching the bolt cutters, her brain clearly short-circuiting. I turned and walked back toward my house. "You coming?" I asked. She didn't answer. But the sound of her footsteps behind me told me she knew this time she wasn't getting away with it. HOA story, HOA stories, homeowner association stories. Francesca stepped into my foyer like a raccoon caught in a pantry, still clutching those bolt cutters, like they might suddenly turn into a get-out-of-jail-free card. I shut the door behind her without saying a word and walked straight toward the living room where my laptop sat open on the coffee table. I already had the footage queued. She hovered just behind me, her eyes darting from the screen to the walls, probably searching for anything she could twist into a citation. I clicked play. The color drained from her face as the video showed her stepping onto my property, fumbling with the chain, then slicing through it like some suburban saboteur on a mission from hell. "I think we can both agree," I said, pausing right at the moment her flashlight swept across my mailbox, "that you weren't doing a routine inspection." She didn't respond, but her bottom lip twitched. "I'm sending this to Officer Martinez," I said, clicking a few buttons. "He lives 2 streets over, remember? His daughter sells cookies door to door every spring. You find her last March for unauthorized solicitation." Francesca's voice cracked for the first time. "This doesn't have to escalate. I'm sure we can find a resolution." "Resolution," I repeated, standing. "You cut through private property at 2 in the morning with a tool from a hardware aisle labeled for emergency use only. You're not getting a resolution. You're getting a police report." She pressed her fingers together, like she was praying to whatever HOA deity she believed in. "I was acting under the authority of the board." "Which board member told you to commit criminal trespass?" Silence. "I'll wait," I said. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked toward the couch, sitting down like her knees had finally given up. That's when I noticed the manila folder under her arm. She hadn't had it outside. She must have brought it in from her car before cutting the lock. I pointed to it. "What's that?" "This is nothing relevant," she said quickly, clutching it tighter. "Hand it over. You're already on my property. Everything on you is evidence now." Her grip tightened, but I just held out my hand, palm up. After a long beat, she finally relented and placed the folder in my hand as if it weighed 50 pounds. Inside were photocopies of documents, surveys, plat maps, and what looked like altered blueprints. I scanned the top page. My property lines had been redrawn, and not subtly. According to these fraudulent maps, my back fence cut into what was now labeled HOA green space. My stomach tightened. "You were going to plant these," I said. She didn't deny it. "We've been discussing redevelopment. A community garden, maybe a dog run." The board, I dropped the folder onto the coffee table. "You were trying to engineer a land grab." "It's not as sinister as you're making it sound," I laughed once hard. "You altered a plat map. That's not just unethical, that's criminal fraud. You were going to sneak this into the county records and pretend it had always been this way." "I never filed anything," she snapped. "But you planned to, and you were gathering evidence to support it. That's why you needed the footage of me violating code or encroaching on HOA property. You were building a case, a fake one." She stared down at her shoes. I grabbed my phone and started another video. "Just to be clear, Francesca, you are currently on my property after committing trespass and destruction of private property. You are in possession of forged documents intended to alter county records. Is that correct?" She looked up, panicked. "You can't record me without consent in Texas." "I only need my own." She lunged toward me, but I stepped back, keeping the phone steady. "Touch me and we add assault to the list." She stopped cold. I hit send and forwarded the footage and a snapshot of the forged documents to Officer Martinez, along with a short explanation. I knew he'd be at my place within 20 minutes. He didn't take kindly to people trying to erase lot lines, especially not when it involved a neighbor who once helped pull his stuck trailer out of a ditch. Francesca's phone buzzed. She looked down, then up at me. "You sent it already." "You're not the only one who knows people," I said. "Turns out the community trusts me a lot more than they trust you." Her expression twisted into something I hadn't seen before, less pompous, more cornered. "This will blow over. You're overreacting." "I'm pressing charges," I said calmly. "I'll also be contacting the county clerk's office in the morning to let them know someone's been preparing fraudulent land documents under their nose." "You can't do this to me," she whispered. "No, Francesca. You did this to yourself." Headlights flashed through the front windows. I stepped over to the door and opened it before she could move. Officer Martinez stepped out of his cruiser, his flashlight already drawn. I waved him in. He walked in, nodding politely to me before turning his gaze to Francesca. "Evening, ma'am." She stood stiff and unblinking. "You mind telling me what you're doing in Brandon's house at 2:30 in the morning with bolt cutters and a folder full of doctored property records?" Her voice was barely audible. "It's not what it looks like." "That's funny," he said. "Because it looks exactly like a Class B misdemeanor stacked on top of at least one felony." He turned to me. "You got the footage ready?" I pointed to the laptop. "Already queued and sent." He watched the first 30 seconds, then looked up. "I'll need both of you to come with me. We'll sort it out downtown." Francesca's knees buckled slightly, and for a second I thought she might faint. She didn't complain, though, not this time. As Martinez read her rights, she didn't interrupt once. I followed them out, watching as he gently but firmly guided her into the back of the cruiser. The bolt cutters sat on my porch, forgotten and pitiful. I picked them up and dropped them into my trash bin. As the patrol car drove off, I stood alone in the quiet, the air heavy with the scent of dew and freshly turned dirt from where she'd stepped through my flower bed. But something else lingered to vindication. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. Tomorrow, the neighborhood would wake up to news they wouldn't believe. But I had the evidence ready, the story airtight and the law on my side. Francesca Delaney wasn't just finished as HOA president, she was finished, period. The next morning, I woke to a text from Officer Martinez asking me to stop by the station. He didn't elaborate, just said they needed a formal statement and that something else had come up. I had barely slept. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since sunrise, mostly neighbors forwarding me links to a neighborhood forum thread titled HOA President Arrested for Breaking and Entering. I pulled into the station around 8. Martinez met me in the lobby, waved me back, and led me to a small room with pale blue walls and a table that had clearly seen better days. He gestured for me to sit, then closed the door behind us. "She's not going quietly," he said, setting a thick file down in front of me. I leaned forward. "What's in there?" "Evidence we pulled from her house and car this morning with a warrant. You're not going to believe what she was sitting on." He opened the folder to a page showing scanned receipts, all stamped with the HOA's letterhead. But the vendors listed were fake companies with names like Greenfield Grounds and Civic Consultants LLC. Martinez pointed to one. "That's her nephew's shell company. It's been billing the HOA for landscaping projects that were never done. We've confirmed at least $20,000 in false invoices." I raised my eyebrows, and the board never noticed. They weren't allowed to see the full financials. She funneled everything through a maintenance committee she chaired alone. Any time someone asked to audit the books, she claimed it was under review. I looked at the next page. It was a scanned email printed from a Gmail account registered under a pseudonym. The subject line: "Adjust the survey lines before Monday." Martinez tapped the corner. "This one's addressed to a guy named Daryl Voss. He's a freelance surveyor. Got his license suspended in Arizona for doctoring property records. Francesca paid him cash to redraw half a dozen lots in the HOA's favor, yours included." I exhaled slowly. So the forged plat map wasn't just a one-off. Far from it. We've got 4 other homeowners who were on the verge of losing backyard footage without realizing it. She was planning to rezone the land and apply for a grant from the county's urban revitalization program. "Let me guess," I said, "with her name on the application." "Exactly." She stood to make close to $50,000 in matching funds if she could prove the HOA had reclaimed underutilized community space. Real slick. Problem was, she needed those yards to technically belong to the HOA first. I sat back. She was trying to steal land to get county money while paying her family fake contractor fees. And using HOA authority to pressure people into compliance if they pushed back. He closed the folder. "We're charging her with falsifying municipal records, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. She's being held without bond until her arraignment." I folded my arms. "What about the rest of the board?" 3 of them already lawyered up. One of them came in this morning and turned over his laptop. Said he thought something was off but didn't want to rock the boat. I nodded. That sounded about right. Most of the board had been handpicked by Francesca. She'd run unopposed for years, mostly because no one wanted to deal with her tactics, the threats of code violations, the whispered rumors about homeowners who didn't fit the community aesthetic. Martinez slid a form across the table. "We're filing for a temporary injunction to freeze the HOA's accounts. City Council's been notified. They're scheduling a special hearing to determine if the association should be placed under court-appointed management." I signed without hesitation. As I left the station an hour later, the sun had fully risen and my phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. I answered it on speaker. "Brandon, it's Chelsea from 2 doors down." "Hey," I said, pulling into my driveway. "What's up?" "I just had 2 men in suits knock on my door asking about HOA fines I paid last year. They said they're investigators from the district attorney's office." "Good," I said. "They're building the case." She hesitated. "They asked if I still had the receipts. I do, but..." All the checks I wrote were made out to Francesca directly. She said the HOA account was under audit and she'd deposit them herself. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Don't throw anything out. They're going to need every one of those. After we hung up, I walked to my porch and spotted something new, a stack of envelopes taped to my mailbox. I pulled them down and flipped through them. Inside were handwritten notes, some from neighbors I barely knew. One of them read, "Thanks for standing up, we didn't know what to do." Another, "I always thought something fishy was going on, let us know how we can help." I sat on my porch steps and read each one. People were angry, sure, but more than that, relieved. The fog Francesca had cast over the neighborhood was lifting, and people were waking up to just how deep the rot had gone. Later that evening, a town hall was called at the community center. It wasn't official, not with the HOA accounts frozen and the board in chaos, but word had spread fast. By the time I arrived, the parking lot was nearly full. Inside, folding chairs had been lined up in rows, and someone had set up a microphone on a stand. It felt more like a courtroom than a community meeting. Chelsea stood at the front, holding up a stack of bank statements. "This is what I gave the investigators today," she said. "Every check I wrote for violation fines ended up in Francesca's personal account. That's theft." Plain and simple. Someone in the back shouted, "She fined me for having a bird bath." Another voice followed. "She tried to repossess my shed for being unapproved architecture." I stepped up to the mic. "We've got a chance to rebuild this place," I said. "But we can't go back to letting one person make all the rules. We need transparency, elections, public access to financials. And most of all, we need to remember this is a neighborhood, not a fiefdom." Applause erupted, not polite, not hesitant, just raw, unanimous support. Afterward, a man I didn't recognize approached me. Mid-40s, tall, with a weathered face and a calm demeanor. "Name's Edgar," he said. "Used to be a city land assessor before I retired out here. I've been keeping my mouth shut for a while, but it's good to see someone finally push back. If you're planning to draft new bylaws, I can help." I shook his hand. "I was hoping someone like you would show up," he smiled faintly. "Francesca tried to get me fined once for parking my truck in the driveway, said it lowered property values. I knew she was trouble then, but I didn't have proof. Now we do." By the time I got home that night, the neighborhood forum had exploded. Dozens of posts, screenshots of Francesca's emails, scanned letters from the HOA threatening liens, and even a blurry video of her shouting at a teenager for skateboarding on the sidewalk. The tide had turned and there was no going back. The next morning, as I stepped out to grab the paper, I noticed something unusual: silence. No passive-aggressive notes, no clipboard bearing volunteers citing shrub height, just the sound of sprinklers and birds. I walked down the sidewalk and saw Edgar measuring the community bulletin board with a tape measure. He looked up, thinking we'll need a glass case. "Key access only, no more surprise announcements." I nodded. "No more surprises, just neighbors." The gate Francesca broke still hung crooked. I left it that way for now, a reminder of how far someone will go when power becomes more important than people. But also a reminder of what happens when the neighborhood finally pushes back. And this time, we weren't backing down. 3 days after Francesca's arrest, the county clerk's office sent an investigator to my house. A tall, methodical man named Wendell. He wore a tan jacket and carried a leather satchel filled with maps, notepads, and a recorder he placed on my kitchen table without ceremony. "She filed preliminary alteration requests under a different name," Wendell said, flipping open a ledger with precise tabs. "Name used was F. Delano, same handwriting as her past filings. She even signed one of them with her real initials by accident." I leaned forward. "Was any of it approved?" "None, but 2 were close. One sat on a junior clerk's desk for over a week. If your camera hadn't caught her trespassing, this would have slipped through." He pulled out a glossy county parcel map and pointed to my lot. "This entire strip right here, she tried to adjust it by 6 feet. That would have reclassified your fence as encroaching on public use land. It would have invalidated your title lines. Could have cost me thousands in legal fees," I said. "More than that. It would have set precedent." She planned to replicate it across the neighborhood. He clicked off the recorder and stood. The DA is filing formal charges beyond the initial fraud. This now qualifies as attempted land theft under civil code. You'll be asked to testify. That evening, I returned to the community center. It had been transformed. Temporary signage on the front door read, "Neighborhood Oversight Committee Open Forum Tonight." Edgar stood near the front, greeting residents by name. Inside, rows of folding chairs were packed with people, retirees, young couples, a few new faces I hadn't seen before. At the front, a woman in a red cotton blazer adjusted a stack of folders. She introduced herself as Linnea, a city-appointed transitional administrator. She had short-cropped silver hair and the confident calm of someone who'd chaired more than a few crisis meetings. "I've reviewed the HOA's financials, the bylaws, and the complaints filed over the last 5 years," she said. This wasn't a poorly run HOA. This was an authoritarian racket disguised as neighborhood management. Someone near the back asked how deep the fraud went. Linnea didn't flinch. "Between falsified invoices, misappropriated fines, and unauthorized surveys, the total sits just under $74,000. Most of it went to personal accounts or unlicensed companies connected to Francesca's family." A man in the third row stood. "Do we get any of that back?" Linnea nodded. "The DA's office is pursuing restitution. Some of it will take time, but bank accounts have already been frozen. We've secured her assets pending legal outcome." She turned to me. "Brandon's footage and his testimony were instrumental. Without it, we wouldn't have caught this in time." I nodded once, not looking for praise, just relieved that the momentum was finally irreversible. After the meeting, Linnea approached me privately. "There's something else," she said, lowering her voice. "We found a contract in Francesca's HOA email server. She'd signed a letter of intent with a developer from out of state. The plan was to push 3 homeowners into foreclosure through fabricated code violations, reclaim the lots, and sell them as a package." I blinked. "Which homes?" She handed me a printout. My stomach turned. 2 of the homes belonged to elderly couples who had lived here since the subdivision was built. The third was a single mother who ran a daycare out of her home. "Would have been legal if the violations were real," Linnea said. "But the paperwork shows she was creating them herself. No inspections were ever performed. She even forged one of the residents' signatures on a compliance waiver." I folded the printout carefully and slid it into my back pocket. "I'll take care of it," I said. 2 days later, I walked up to the brick house at the end of the cul-de-sac where Mrs. Alvarez lived. She was in her 80s, and her rose bushes were the pride of the block. She answered the door in a crocheted shawl, surprised to see me. "I'm here about the notice you got last month," I said. "The one about your porch lights being non-compliant," she frowned. "Yes, I replaced them. Cost me almost $600. You didn't need to, it was fake." She stared at me, confused. I handed her a letter from Linnea's office confirming the fraud. Her hands trembled slightly as she read it. "She was trying to force you to sell," I told her, "so she could pass your lot to a developer." Mrs. Alvarez stepped back and sat slowly in the wicker chair on her porch. "I thought I'd done something wrong," she whispered. "You didn't." I visited the other 2 homes that afternoon. At each one I delivered the same letter. At each doorstep I saw the same stunned look, an entire weight lifted off their shoulders. That night the forum thread exploded again. But this time it wasn't outrage, it was plans. Edgar posted a draft for new bylaws. Chelsea offered to host a kids' art event in the park now that it was no longer being threatened by redevelopment. A contractor named Vince volunteered to repair fences and gates damaged by HOA fines, free of charge, for anyone affected. I stayed up until nearly midnight reading every comment. That neighborhood, once ruled by fear of citations and surprise inspections, was transforming. The following week, I sat in the county courthouse beside Linnea and 2 other residents. The courtroom was quiet, sterile, and humming with tension. Francesca sat at the defendant's table, her gray blazer a size too large, her hair pulled back tightly. She didn't look up once. The prosecutor laid out the charges: fraud, malicious property misrepresentation, attempted land theft, and criminal conspiracy. When the judge asked how she pleaded, her lawyer rose and uttered a single word: guilty. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Francesca never looked back at the gallery. She was sentenced to 3 years in state prison, 5 additional years probation, and full restitution to all victims. Outside, a few reporters waited. I gave a short statement. Nothing dramatic, just that communities should be managed by the people who live in them, not by those who think they own them. Weeks passed. We held our first real election. Edgar was voted chair of the new neighborhood council. Chelsea took finance. I was nominated for compliance but declined. I'd done my part. The fence gate she broke was later replaced by a local welder who refused to take payment. Instead, he etched a small design into the metal, a single camera lens with the words "We see you now" beneath it. On a warm Saturday morning, I stood by that gate as kids ran past on scooters. Parents sipped coffee on their porches and someone grilled burgers from 2 doors down. The air was different, not just lighter, cleaner. Like a storm had finally passed, Francesca never returned. Her house was eventually sold to a young couple who planted a lemon tree in the yard. No one mentioned her name anymore. She had become a cautionary tale, not a shadow, and the next time someone asked about our HOA, I was able to answer with pride. We don't have one of those anymore. We have a community.